speaker, esteemed panel. We say that in situations in society where some parts of society are disenfranchised, cannot get certain social benefits, cannot get social structures that the country, the state should provide to them, that they can't get it for themselves, it is alright for us to coerce other people in order to do that. We say that, for example, this is the case of education, for example, from the age of like 15 to 18. We think it's good for individual, good for society, and therefore it is legitimate for us to actually coerce them into that. Therefore, what we're going to do in this speech is A, show why we have a social need for this thing. Secondly, how it actually solves the problem. And thirdly, why it is actually pretty good for the individual itself. Firstly, mechanism. Look, we're going to pay them like a symbolic payment and make sure they have their basic needs covered, right? They're going to have they're going to always have a place to live. They're always going to have food, water, electricity, internet access, all of that. And added to that, they're going to have some sort of symbolic payment. Thirdly, we're going to say that they can continue this service if they will to. We think it is great. Fourthly, we have some consideration on their preferences, right? Just like in some military services like in Israel, you can actually rank your preferences and we will take it into consideration, but not entirely. If we have a need and nobody wants to go there, we will force the people who put it in their highest consideration there. Fifthly, where are we actually going to do that? For example, teachers in school in rural areas in European countries. For example, hospitals. For example, social workers. We're going to train them, obviously, to some extent, because we don't want them to do a shitty job there. Any clarifications about the mechanism? Yes?
How is this going to play out in countries where currently there is military conscription?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So in countries where there is currently military conscription, how is this going to play out?
What do you mean, how is it going to play out? You mean if there is a military conscription in the country, it's going to still be there, I think? It's not relevant to this debate. Okay. Firstly, why do we have a social need for that? We say two things are detrimental to our society currently. Firstly, the fragmentation that is caused by the demographic changes that our society is going through. What do we mean by that? We mean that, for example, the influx of some sort of immigration, refugees, asylum seekers, create some sort of backlash, societal backlash that disenfranchises them in society. They are usually more in certain parts of the city, maybe in some places in certain rural areas, where we have, as a state, and because of pressure from other parts of society, no incentive to actually invest in them. And this situation is actually like a vicious circle, because when they have no investment there, when they have poor schools, when they have less hospitals there, they're going to be, for example, more prevalent to crime, more prevalent to certain things that are considered in society bad, and therefore going to be hated more and therefore disenfranchised more. Secondly, we say that there is a lack of incentive of most people to actually get there. I don't want to go to the rural area. I don't want to go to the certain place where I'm mostly, even if we give them money, the problem these people aren't willing to do that. When I can get a job for a similar salary in my city, I'll be reluctant to go to the rural areas to invest there. Therefore, we think that we have just really a need to invest in these places. How do we actually solve these problems by the investment? Firstly, like opposition are going to say, well, they're going to do a crappy job. No, this is false, and we can say it every time we make something mandatory. Students don't do a crappy job at school because it is mandatory, and we think there's a good reason to it. Firstly, the idea that you get used to the fact that you're there. You get used to the idea that you teach schools in rural areas. You get used to the idea that you actually do something good for society. You get used to the idea that you are a sanitary in a hospital. You get used to that, and you get a good feeling about your job, just like most people do when they do things. Even if they are coerced to it, most people tend to find things to enjoy from, even if they are there by mandatory service. Also, it is not actually that a bad thing. Most people can enjoy themselves teaching, most people enjoy being social workers. Secondly, the feeling that I am there for a good reason, the feeling that I am actually contributing to society is critical at this point. Because, yeah, I'm going to be a bit mopey when I first get there, but when I see that I actually help children, actually help people get better, I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to do a better job. Why is it critical? These people are going to get, and therefore we're going to say that these people are going to do a good job at the end of the day, in a few weeks or so. We think that this is critical in these places. We think that when you have no sanitary brothers in hospitals, when you have no good teachers in rural areas, the fact that even if they are not the best teachers out there, if they are just 18-year-old kids teaching math for first graders, they're going to be a better job on the comparative. When they have nothing there, at least there are people who feel that they're doing something good, they're doing a good job there, and they are more than willing to help them at the end of the day. Therefore, we think that just on the fact of social mobility, we create a better situation for them. We create a less fragmented society because of the fact that now these people have a way to advance themselves, because of the fact that now they have access to social structures that they didn't have before. Before I continue, I'll take closing.
Right.
Opening, sorry.
Right. Why can't we solve the problems of regional development through the policies of regional development by investing in these areas and delegating resources where they are necessary?
A, political power there, the incentive for people not to invest in there. B, my entire first point about how these people are hated in the country, are more hated the less we invest in there. I think that is like the best way to solve it because of the fact that this is what I'm getting to now. Less fragmented society. Because we think it is critical that me as a middle-class white man from the Central European city is going to the rural areas. We think it creates bad stigmas of these places. The fact that I'm working now and every day with these people actually helps me to know them. I think that when all 18-year-old, most 18-year-old kids in society actually go there, actually do this, it helps us create the bad stigmas that we have on these people. I'm no longer going to feel so even scared, like in an intuitive, like primal sense of people who are different to me, and I think it is critical. The fact that I'm going to be able now more willing to help them, more willing to let them into, more willing to hire them to jobs, even if there are anti-discriminatory law, this is critical. We think therefore that we are just going to get a way better society. Now, let's talk about the individual, because I think it's like less important in this way because we already showed you that solving these things is important enough to actually course them, but I think it's just actually good to the person itself. After it's going to expand a bit on that. We think that the fact that I'm going to get some responsibility is critical for 18-year-old children. They've just left this space where they were always coerced to do things, and they are left out in the big world without actually the ability to, in many cases, to get the better decisions for themselves. We say that when you give them the sense of responsibility they're going to get from these services, they're going to be better off on their own. After 1 year when I had responsibility over children, responsibility over a hospital room, and I had to get it cleaned, I am more likely to realize what is responsibility in my life. Therefore, I am more likely to get better decisions when it regards this sort of responsibilities. Therefore, I think in the overall there is even some benefit to the individuals themselves on the comparative when they are just lost when they get out of the educational system at the age of 18. So, because we solve detrimental social problems, because it is good for the individual, please propose.
Thank you very much. Okay, go. Marvelous. Off one.
So I'm going to speak about, firstly, whether the state has the justification to do it, how we coerce people, or how we make people to do something when we can tell them that they have to do it, to do something, and when this most definitely is not the case. Secondly, about 3 very clear harms that the collective will face with it, which means that the only justification that the prof gave us, the benefit of the collective, falls, which means that their case also falls. Before that, 2 points of rebuttal. They speak about disenfranchised people and people in regional places or rural places where we don't have resources for them, etc. We think that you can actually, invest into these areas. You can do a lot of those things that currently are being done in some states successfully, in some other states not so successfully. That doesn't mean that they cannot be done. We think that you can, for example, pay rural teachers collectively by the state more than you do for cities teachers, etc., etc. Secondly, we think that even if that's not true and all of the analysis is true, then we think that you have no incentive to actually, for regular teachers to go into these regions. The only teachers that will go are the ones that are forced to do it for the duration of 1 year, and no one really ever goes there besides them, which means that in the end you will still have better education there, and then ultimately rural areas will still suffer due to that. But more importantly, we think that ultimately if they answer to a POI that there's no political will to do it, then there's no political will to do this motion at all. We think that ultimately we need to speak about what's the most efficient way to run a collective and neglect the idea whether it can actually be done. Secondly, they speak about this is a method to how we can get responsibility and how that to do that is awesome. We think that ultimately when you're forced to do something that you don't really want to do, then it doesn't really grow responsibility, so that's one reason. But more importantly, ultimately, what grows your responsibility is when you need to like sustain yourself, when you need to handle yourself in the job market, when you need to study, etc., etc. Versus under their model, you simply live a year. No one really cares whether you do a job good or not, because you're still going to do it even if you fail, because it's an obligation put up by the state, which means that ultimately you have less motivation to do it well, and it most definitely doesn't teach you any part of responsibility. Other things will be covered by my material, so let's go to that. Firstly, let's look at whether the state has a justification to do that. I think that ultimately states provide us with a system in which we can handle, but it's important to note that its system is for the individual. We know that sustaining a collective is important because otherwise we would not have that system, but ultimately that system that we try to sustain is for the individual, and so that the individual can have the most possible fulfilling life. We acknowledge that in some circumstances we do limit that, and there are reasons why we need to do that. The very clear reasons in broad are, for example, taxes. We need to do that because that is an essential need so that we can give public goods which the person, individual, cannot get for themselves, whether it's police, whether it's emergency and all of those things. We secondly think that we do taxes simply because I take away from the society and now I cover that loss that the society is facing by taxes and paying that back. We think that there is a very clear essential need for that because there is no other possibility to sustain the system in any other way. We think that secondly, the way that we limit people are by laws. We think that the same principle applies in the sense that it's essential in order for the system to sustain itself. There's no other possibility to do it in order for us to have a system in which benefits for the individual who it's supposed to do. We also think that, like, in the end, the criteria when the state can actually do it and when the state does it is the criteria of essential, whether the state can sustain itself by other means. We don't really think this is something that is necessary. We think that there are other methods, whether it's regional development, whether it's, all of these other things that we can be doing in order to solve the prop things that they had. Moreover, we don't think that the state really has, due to it not having a necessity towards that, the state doesn't really have the right to infringe on individual rights, because we don't really get that much out of it versus what we lose. More importantly, if we go into specifics as to why and when we actually limit people's rights, then there are three very clear criteria. It's whether to help the individual. That's what the opening government started with their intro. We force children to go to school. We do it simply because there is an overriding good for the individual that we need to provide for them. We don't think that this individual that we make to go there doesn't actually have that overriding good for them. Probably they lose out on the workforce. Probably they don't really want to do it, so ultimately they lose. Secondly, is the question of whether we have a third-party harm, but only third-party harm if my action actually commits that third-party harm, versus me not going is not an active choice which creates someone's third-party harm, which means that forcing me to go there is not enough, is not legitimate by the state because I haven't done really anything in order to cause that. Thirdly, it's the question of whether we have massive amount of benefit for the society. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the only criteria that the webpage tried to convince us of. And we think that there are three very clear ideas as to why that's not true, which leads us to my second part, as to how the collective will most definitely lose. We think that the collective is a part of individuals, and we think that if an individual's right to choose is infringed, then the idea of choice itself gives us the notion of happiness. The fact that I can control my body in itself is something that provides me with a better life and a better quality of life. So ultimately, we think that they take away from that, and they already take away from the individual's happiness, which decreases the collective's way of having the most fulfilling life, which is the main criteria why we overall infringe on individual rights, why we make people do something that they don't want to. We think that they lose on that. Secondly, we think that ultimately the people can contribute in very many other different ways. In a sense that during that time, I might be doing something else, for example, studying, for example, I don't know, having a business, all of the things that I want to do, things that I'm motivated into doing. If people are motivated into doing these things, they probably do it more efficiently, which means that they create more resources by working somewhere else versus what they actually extract when they work in these places that the prop bench tries to force them into. Which means that ultimately the revenue or the value that I can get from that individual's lifespan of that 1 year is much more higher if we don't force them to do something that they don't want to do. So ultimately, state loses that contribution that they have from that, which means the collective loses. And thirdly, we think that it creates a sentiment in which people actually don't want to do these workforces that they speak about. They tell us that there are places where people don't want to go, but if you force these people into going there, if you tell them that you have to go and spend a year, for example, away from your friends and family in a place that you don't like, doing something that you don't like, that most probably does not incentivize you in the future also do that very same thing. We think that it alienates people from the state, which means that a collective loses by having a lesser possibility in the future to grant these very same places or very same means of helping the state, because the people don't want to do it anymore as they've been forced to do it for once. Furthermore, they already believe that they have taken the burden and fulfilled the burden before the state, which means that they don't really have that burden anymore, which means that even that is not a motivation for them to go. So ultimately, the collective loses, and also we have other methods to do it. It's not a necessity, it's not essential. Oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I know that everyone in the audience has lots of opinions and ideas, and that's wonderful, but we are here to listen particularly to 8 people, so if everyone in the audience could try to be very quiet, that would be really appreciated. Thank you very much, and now let's have Rob.
First, let's deal with the POI from second proposition. They asked us how will this be in engagement with military conscription. Well, most Western countries do not have military conscription or military draft, and those that actually do is the most symbolic one, like Switzerland, so we don't think this is really a problem. In case that there is a war, military will get first picks. Secondly, this is the line of argumentation we get from first proposition. Why can't we just invest in these places? Because what we bring you is this: the problem is not money. The problem is people. The problem is social connections. The problem is not working integration. The problem is, you tell us why just not pay more to teachers in these rural areas, because the teachers there are of bad quality, and if you put money into those places, good teachers just don't want to come there because the quality of life in those areas is just not good. So just throwing money at the problem simply doesn't help it. Secondly, you're telling us you're not engaging with what Tom gave you about the analysis. That basically what we're trying to create here is social integration. We're trying to make people from different parts of society actually meet each other, create connection, and based on those personal connections, they're starting to break down social constructs of delegitimization, of racial profiling, and actually helping each other out by actually hiring more people of different ethnicity, from people they didn't even think of before, didn't even realize before, actually challenging their own beliefs and becoming better people and a better society by the play on numbers. First proposition is actually is talking about. But let's talk about she's trying to give us the previous speaker is trying to give us 3 reasons why the collective is getting harmed. First of all, it tells we infringe on the right for your body. I'm going to deal with this very directly in my first positive, but she basically tells us it harms the happiness of the personal individual, so the collective happiness becomes less. Let's do the play by numbers. If I take one kid from Vienna and I send him down to the worst village in south of Vienna, he teaches 30 children, they get better education, 30 kids have better happiness, yay, the play by numbers works for us. But secondly, we think that if you play by rights, then people in worse parts of society also have the right for reasonable services, reasonable infrastructure, reasonable healthcare, reasonable education, and this becomes the only way to provide it for them because money just doesn't cut it. So if we're talking that military draft is caused by a war necessity, we're saying this national service is caused by a social necessity. And first of all, in my positive, I'd like to mitigate the freedom versus personal harm kind of thing that we have going on here. So yes, we lose some freedom. Some people will be upset, some people will be mopey, some people, you know what, they're just going to downright suffer for the whole year. No thank you. But what do we say to that? First of all, I'm going to explain to you why it's not that actually bad. First of all, it's not prison, we're giving them reasonable conditions to live. They're still living in Western society. We're not sending them to an Iraqi village, we're sending them to the south of Vienna, to the south of Austria.
Question.
Secondly, no thank you, this happens to everyone. A big part of why I feel deprived or oppressed is because I do my comparison to other people. When this happens to everyone of my age, everyone that I know gets drafted into this situation, I don't feel that bad about it because I know this is part of my life path. Thirdly, people just fall into patterns. They become habituated to things. They get to learn this new situation and they make the best out of them. Usually they kind of make it work. And hopefully, people under those situations create experiences with each other. They develop a sense of camaraderie with each other, with the other people on this expedition with them, and so they feel quite good. Why is this good for the individual? I've just mitigated all the harms. Let's talk about why this is good for the individual. It creates experiences that challenge you on the very basic level. It makes you re-examine all of your beliefs about other people you've actually never quite met before. And we think this is good for you, even if you don't really want to do it. You're now an adult, you're an 18-year-old person, but you probably never left the big city you grew up in. If you have, it's just been on a flight with your parents abroad. We think this is not very good for you. We think you should be challenged, your belief system should be challenged, and this would you should look at other people, be exposed to other ideas that you haven't been exposed to them before, except maybe in a classroom in a 45-minute period. We think this makes you a more whole individual, it makes you a better individual, because now you're a more complex one. Secondly, we think we're giving these people a sense of mission, a sense of social contribution. That in of itself makes people feel good, that they're actually contributing to the society they live in. It makes them feel that they're important in the society they live in, and so we think they feel quite good about themselves on the general level. Before I go on, who I come second? First. Anyone? Yes.
Okay, so how good do you think these people are going to be at the jobs you make them do?
I think that the first one they'll probably suck at it. After that I can teach them, I can train them. I'm not going to make them nuclear physicists. I'm going to make them change bedpans at the nursery. I'm going to make them take care of babies at daycare. I'm going to teach them first graders English and math. I think an 18-year-old can do quite a sufficient job at that. Let's go quickly about the social benefits we get from this. 4 of them. First of all, we get some sort of social mobility based on personal connections. People from different classes get to meet each other out. Now the Muslim immigrant that lives in a rural area can actually meet someone who works in who might one day work in high tech in the central of the same country. They actually get to know each other. They experience things together. I'm not talking just about the kids, but the people who are actually going on these expeditions together. They create relationships. They become friends. One day, you might actually, on the basis of these relationships, they might work together. They might contribute together to society. They might go to a political party together. Secondly, we think we're more likely to get people just to volunteer more in our society. We think this is a great benefit on our side that actually helps society on the general level. People who've actually found this thing to be good for them, who found this a fulfilling experience, might actually go on and do this for more years, and even they might in the future remember this as a good experience and just volunteer. Thirdly, we get more complex citizens. In our political system, when we give a vote to each person, we want them to make the best, most informed decisions. Once a person has a belief system that has never been challenged, that he has never experienced the people he's voting on, that he's never actually met them, he tends to think about them in wide generalizations. We don't want that. We don't want people to vote on immigrant issues just from reading the paper. We want them to actually meet immigrants. We want them to think about immigrants. We want them to think about how Muslims conduct themselves in their everyday life. We want them to know how minorities feel, and so they can make better decisions and to vote better. And fourthly, this is what Tom's give you. These places just have social infrastructure that is crashing. It is not working. This is the right of these people to receive fundamental services from the state. We do not accept that just throwing money at it is going to work. So we beg you to propose.
Thank you very much. Okay, up to
Dear Mr. Speaker, political will is a strange thing in debates, right? They say they can fight political will by saying that everybody should be able to do this, right? Because we think that it's very unlikely that each and every person would say, yeah, I want to give up a year of my life because of ambiguous reasons. So if they can fight that will, we will fight political will that hinders regional development. We think there should be more resources put into rural areas. We think you should create incentives for individuals to make decisions to go there, to make those decisions easier to be made and make people more happy, but not force them. We are saying that the model is ineffective in itself, because as they say that, they will take people's preference into account, right? Meaning that a white person from a big city will never go to a rural area or want to serve as immigrants. Okay, they added the clause that if it's necessary. Then they sort of argue that we need to shift populations around. But that is not effective for the state, right? Because if you always want to go for the aims that they are striving for, in a sense that I integrate with different classes from different regions, right? Then you will have to get housing for each and every individual, each and every state if you want to rotate them and create this sort of exchange, meaning that it's just ineffective for the state, again, not likely to happen. And even if that is true, that they really switch cities around, populations full of cities around, then people will still not integrate there, because after I'm done teaching the kids, and I feel bad about it because I want to be there, I will go out and socialize with the rest of my friends who will also transfer to that region to force to do their job, and then we just talk about how awful it is and how much we hate the state and people we're working for now. So there is no really pragmatic outcome of how they achieve their goals. But what is important in this debate is the question of A, where is it legitimate in the first place? Is this a proportional infringement on behalf of the state? Secondly, will the collective win? And thirdly, will the individual harms be greater than the collective asserted benefits of the proposition? Rebuttal before that. We say that people don't go there because they don't want to go there. We like the idea that I put a random person who has done decent at school in front of a classroom or in a hospital doesn't make them effective at it, right? We are saying that you get very poor quality service because these professions require a lot of nuance and competence, which people study for years, firstly. So they will be awful at it. Secondly, we say they're less motivated than if they would be incentivized by a large pay, then they internalize the idea that they want to go there. So they will be dropping quality in that. Moreover, we say that you are basically circulating people on a yearly basis. Usually you need a lot of competence which you gain through experience in order to be a good teacher, in order to be a good nurse or a medical doctor, right? But we say that if you constantly rotate these people, you disincentivize the political will or the idea that we should train more teachers, we should create more incentives, we should have more nurses, because you have a constant flow of 18-year-olds who are incompetent, meaning that you don't have that much competition for people who want to be professionals at that work field, meaning that you will get less quality service if we would with good regional development. The second idea they have is integration, right? We are saying that integration doesn't work. Their assertion goes like this. People, you work together with them, firstly you dislike it, then you suck it up, then you start to love them. That is not true. We think that the idea of how you relate to a certain class or ethnicity is influenced by several factors. Firstly, it is influenced by previous positions, so if they want to talk about a context where people are awfully racist and not nice to other people, we think that previous position is carried on to the context in which you're at, also making you more likely to do a shit job because you are racist, right? But even if that's not true, the context in which you socialize with people is something that influences your perception of them, right? They say we create camaraderie. We think that you rather enforce stereotypes, right? Because if you're put into a rural area where kids have come from a less advantageous position, right? They haven't gotten that much schooling at home. This means that they might be less competent in your opinion, and if you're forced to teach them, you reinforce that stereotype by teaching the people who come from this privilege. So after you go back from a year, you actually have reinforced the idea that these people who are of the different ethnicity are actually lesser or less competent or are all thugs, although it's not an individual trait, but just a systematic error. So you actually make people more racist in the long term and less likely to integrate and more likely to undermine that anyway. But what we say is that firstly, you don't have as right as a state to do this regardless of the merits, right? Because individuals only restrict individual autonomy only when it's A, harm to others, which is this is not an active harm like assault, and B, we restrict it when it's essential to maintain the system in which individuals' rights can be protected, like with the police, right? This is not the case, since there is not that sort of essential necessity to it, because there are systems in place in which we can redistribute and provide these services as a whole. So they have never actually responded to Kristen's principal claim that this motion is unfair and therefore shouldn't be done. But okay, even if that's not true, we say that the collective doesn't gain from this because collective consists of individuals, right? And we have created the state system in order to actually have self-actualization and to gain more. Like, many people wouldn't benefit from nice parks or whatever positions you would put them in, but we say that even if they would even if they would gain, this individual happiness is hampered because you lose self-possession, right? That is an inherent something that is important to you. They say that you will start to like it, but what we think is that you will not like things you are forced to. More likely you will be alienated. I'll take in a moment. You're more likely to be alienated from them because you're associated with forced structure. That's why, like, kids don't want to learn usually unless they're convinced otherwise at home, right? I mean, these people are less likely to actually contribute later on in their life. Yes.
As an 18-year-old, it's less likely for you to be really hardcore racist because you probably just learned to see it from your father. But now you will go to a new environment. You will have a new authority figure who will teach you the job and give the narrative and give the information and change your mind.
Right. Even if you're not racist and we have a next generation of people coming on, you really don't need this policy because you can have just voting for regional development and these people are incentivized already to help these individuals, so it's a completely unnecessary plan in that case. But if there is a problem, you make it worse. We think that it's the idea of individuals to shape their identity and their self-possession is something that overrides the collective, because the collective consists of individuals. We allow people to drink and smoke, although not only damaging themselves, they're sort of like driving up their societal costs, right, in the sense that they use the healthcare system more. But we think that is an overriding good, because then each and every individual in that system is actually able to derive self-possession and happiness and self-actualization through the actions they take, right? Their idea of 30 kids win, 1 teacher loses isn't accurate. 31 people lose because all of them are forced into a system where they cannot have self-possession over their body at some point of life, although it's like chronologically different, right? So meaning that we actually create a system where, although we have maybe some better parks, nicer, like, I don't know, houses that are painted or whatever social benefits or social work you find for these people, we think that each and every individual will be worse off because that is something that is not necessary for them. It's much better if they actually go do a job or whatever they would do with that year because they will be more motivated, more effective at it, still create societal gain by paying taxes and creating systems, and not be disincentivized to actually interact with minorities or later on do voluntary work, which is now under the proposition turns into an awful practice of state force.
Thank you very much. And so now moving into uncharted territory for this debate, Prop 3.
We think as an 18-year-old person, you are in the age of shaping your ideology. You are in the age of shaping your ideas. You will go out to society and will vote in the next coming election. We believe it's state's duty to make sure that every individual expose the whole part of the society and whole part of the ideas and eliminate marginal harmful ideas like homophobia, like racism, like sexism, like ageism, etc. And we will, on the closing government, will explain to you how people change their minds and how the effect will be. And lastly, I'm going to talk about what's the legitimacy, because obviously that's what opening opposition is really worried about. 2 points of rebuttal. Right to choose, because it's something important. Let's give an example to this. When you're a working person and pay 30% of income taxes, that means you worked 1 year out of 3 years for the state to distribute resources to disadvantaged group. We think this idea is pretty similar because you're an 18-year-old, you didn't earn anything, but you still, I think, have a responsibility to distribute to the society, and we think it's basically the same. Secondly, forcing cause hate and incompetency. We have 3 answers to that. First of all, people do change their minds because they see that they had some misconceptions before, which I will explain. It's crucial that these people are 18 years old because they don't have necessarily sticky, ossifying ideas, you know? They can easily be shaped. Secondly, visiting pensioners and reading certain kind of books, visiting refugee camps and cooking meal together together doesn't require competency, right? And thirdly, if you want to go to medical school, you probably be competent if you go help in a hospital. If you want to be a lawyer, you're probably going to be helpful in the refugee camp studying the problems of immigration, etc. We think people also can be competent in those areas, even though it's not required. Let's begin with our extension. How do people change their minds? We give you 3 reasons. People get new information, people see new authority figures, and people challenge their fears and stereotypes. Let's begin with the first one. You are an 18-year-old, you live with your parents probably all your life, you learn your majority of your opinions from them, you were exposed to certain stereotypes and certain ideas. You probably had the same friends over the course of years, you probably watched the same TV what your parents watched, so you probably consume the same ideology and same media. So you never left your own social circle probably, and you just left in an echo chamber, keep repeating the same ideas, you kept listening that immigrants are bad because they are bad people, without giving any reason, certain reason, right? So when you go to this kind of environment, the refugee camp, you will get new information. You will see that what these people's problems are. You will have the background story. You will learn about the war in the Syria and how terrible it was, and how their lives were affected. And you will see that there is no difference between you and them because you will have a daily interaction and see that they can be happy as you are happy. They can be sad as you are sad. They can also be sad because they broke up their boyfriend and you also broke up with your boyfriend, and you can discuss about all these things, right? So you can have this daily interaction. It's like our debaters, like we are so open-minded people because we always forced to take different positions from ourselves, and we meet so many new people, right? I met so many Israeli people, and even though I'm coming from a Turkey, I don't have any phobia against them because I know that they are super nice people, right? So you can actually empathize with these people. Secondly, you will have new authority figure because these people will work with the people, they will have certain supervisors who are doing it for money or who are doing it for idealist reasons, who are doing it as occupation. These people will give them the context, they enthusiastically explain why these people are so harmful position and give them the reasons to change their minds because they can show them that actually these people have a reasons to be in that situation, and they will hear different arguments. They will hear arguments first of all, and they will hear different reasons other than what their parents or what their peers told them, because these people are qualified, probably much more educated, and have access to this information. Thirdly, it will challenge the stereotypes and fears, because you've been told that immigrants are stealing your jobs. You will see that immigrants are actually also trying to survive, and they can be quite actually smart, maybe smarter than you. You will see that if you do a test together or a puzzle, you will see that that person is actually beating you, or if you play a chess, you will see that this person is also capable. You also maybe have an idea that people who are on welfare are lazy. You will see that these people are not lazy, on the contrary, they don't have the equal access to all the stuff that you have access to. So you will actually challenge your ideas, and you will see the individual behind the stereotypes, and this will change your mind. You will be more civil, and you will actually, we will prevent them to ossificate their bad ideas. What's the effect? Far-right parties will be able to less likely to capitalize this idea of fear and stereotypes, because they are much likely to capitalize on these people who are coming to vote at the age of 18. We will probably protect vulnerable people much more likely because we will have less hate crimes, because we will much more likely to protect these people, because we will have less violence in society, and we will have less discrimination because these people much likely to understand the situations these people are having. Yes?
As sad as it is, majority of the people are still anti-immigrant, still anti-LGBT rights, which means that the majority of people will be sent to places where people are still the same.
In your model, we see no change. In our model, we see that people who are being 18, changing their ideas, going back to their circles, affecting their own circle, and it creates a snowball effect. We think that this is the only way we can have a change. You have no alternative, we are better off. Secondly, why it's legitimate? Because state can coerce people to do stuff for 2 reasons. 1, for the societal benefit. 2, it's also good for them. Yeah? If you are a racist, it's probably bad for you to be a racist. If you are a liberal person, it's probably better for you, because you're probably much more likely to be happy, because racists are generally hateful people, right? So, but why it's good for the society? Because, and why you have to make a sacrifice for the society? Because you live in the society. If society didn't exist, you wouldn't be in this situation. We need each other because there is division of labor. You don't have to cut your own wood. You don't have to chop your own meat. You can actually get interaction and you can get all these resources. We give you security, free education, free healthcare. You actually have a safety net in the society. Therefore, you have an obligation to provide to those who didn't have these chances. And lastly, we give you relations. No one wants to be alone. You will not probably like to get married, find a girlfriend, find a boyfriend or a friend. Society provides you all these benefits. Therefore, you have to give back to society. And normally you are doing it with taxes, but as an 18-year-old, you still have this obligation and we can shape your ideas. You probably will be a better person. And if you can choose, you will be so happy with this motion. For all of
Thank you very much. Up three. I know. Almost.
Dear panel, a closing opposition, we are going to be quite sensible. Putting an unmotivated, uneducated racist in front of a classroom of completely deprived and uneducated children probably isn't going to be the best for them. That's for sure they're going to be okay. I'm going to start off with 2 points of rebuttal, the rest will be interval. Then firstly, what's going to happen with these communities, why are they going to be worse off? Secondly, what are going to be the nationwide consequences of this, why especially poor people getting competed out, why do we think that's incredibly harmful? So, 2 points of rebuttal. Firstly, about this legitimacy thing floating around. Firstly, now they're like completely benefited on either benefit to the individual or benefit to the society, so down to what extent it plays a role. But more importantly, the only justification we got from Propos, it's a bit like taxes. No, there are 2 crucial differences. Firstly, know that in taxes, I can choose the way I want to pay my taxes, right? I can become a lawyer because I have a real moral system, whereas my team partner could become a doctor given the fact that he's willing to help people, right? I don't want to become a doctor, he doesn't want to become a lawyer. The extent to which we limit the choice of the individual is far, far, far bigger. At the moment we are going to force them to do certain work, right? So I think there's far harm there. Secondly, know that it's impossible for a state to persist without taxes. We haven't had this policy implemented for thousands of years, states have existed, right? So I think on the balance there's probably a substantial difference to be made there. Then, shortly about like racism before I move on. Okay, so firstly we think there are other ways in which we can solve this problem, right? We think education might be incredibly useful and we see it being effective as well. As the whole point is that you need to know that certain minority people also have boyfriends that can break up with them. I'm not sure if I need to work with these people for a year, right? That's the only analysis we're getting out of them. Secondly, I think the whole point that is explicitly conceded, it's that's not rational, right? Even racists know that certain minority people are doing considerably better, and not all immigrants are horrible people, right? I think at the moment one will be successful smart, you will perceive that person as an exception, right? You won't believe they will be the rest. But on the other hand, given the fact that you're going to have a whole classroom full of them, all the people that affirm your beliefs, all the people that affirm your stereotypes, are probably the ones that you're going to remember, right? That's how racism works, they're entrenching it rather than improving it. Thirdly, notice people will probably get in society at some point in their life completely unsure why you can't like deal with the stereotypes then, right? Specifically given the fact that we already outlined massive farms. Fourthly, note it's an incredibly small part of this debate, right? We don't have that many refugee camps in Austria. It's going to be impossible to put every 18-year-old into it, right? So we can't have it all. We think it's only going to work for a very, very small part of people. Also know that you can't select that, like saying, are you a racist? Yes. Oh no, then you go to the refugee camp. Probably isn't going to be a selection mechanism. So firstly, all communities. Firstly, why these people will be absolutely horrible at it. Now there are like 2 things that require how successful you are at a certain job. Firstly, your quality, secondly, your motivation. On quality. Now that these are jobs that require years of training, right? You need to go to university like to become a teacher at all, and like taking care of the elderly is considerably more than changing diapers, right? You need to calm them down, you need to comfort them, you need to be there for them. That's why these people are trained for years. Those are things you lose out on. Specifically because there are people that are like just graduated from high school, that don't have any specific knowledge, and don't have that much like experience with people or analytical thinking. That's probably relevant. Especially since Klaus Bob is the first one to point out that not the whole society goes to university, right? So I think there are people who don't have that much education or probably still have to do these jobs. Secondly, on motivation. These people are going to hate it. Why are they going to hate it? Firstly, as a 90-year-old, 80-year people are awful, right? These are people that want to change their life. These are people that generally like don't like authority, so I think that's an important thing to mention here. Secondly, you're going to have to be forced to do something that you didn't like. We call it high school, you've just gotten out of there, you're quite happy that you're going to do this. That's why people are getting a gap year. We think you're going to be even angrier at the moment you have to keep doing this. Thirdly, there's no accountability mechanism whatsoever. The first thing they can do is say, you're no longer allowed to use this job. Yeah, that's the whole point, right? That's probably what you want to do, otherwise you would have signed up for this volunteer work in the first place. So we think you have no incentive whatsoever to do this job any kind of form. It means you're not accountable. Especially not if they do want to talk about racism, although we think it's a small part of this debate, you probably are not going to like this kids. Couple of harms from this. Firstly, now that you talk about disenfranchised communities, right? The whole problem is that you get a self-perpetuating cycle, which you get the worst kind of education, right? At the moment you're going to make these people teachers, A, they're going to hate the classroom, B, they're going to be crappy teachers. That means you deprive them of every fundamental education, right? That means you're going to entrench this community instead of improving them. I think that's incredibly problematic. Secondly, given the fact that they're going to hate it, they're quite likely to blame the people they are working with, for example, the people in high school, or for example, the elderly, right? Especially because they're not going to be too happy with it either. It means you start hating these communities even more. What then is the comparative? Simply throw money at it until the problem disappears. We think that's worked before. Is that we don't have any political capital for this. Firstly, we're the government. Aha, the is also. Secondly, more importantly, we think these are things that we decided on a nationwide basis, right? In every country in Europe and most around the world, they're having nationwide salaries for teachers. So we simply don't buy this because it's impossible to get teachers there. We think it is possible at the moment to be paid enough. No thanks. And secondly, they sell you, political capital. We think people are not going to like being in these communities. At the moment we take CG at its strongest and say this is the time where you shape your ideas and shape your preferences for the rest of your life. Under that exact logic, you are going to hate the communities and going to hate the people within the communities. It means you're far and far less likely to be willing to send money there. At the moment you're not willing to send money there currently, you're completely unsure why you would be willing to send your son there, right? So I think they're worsening the problem of political capital. Thirdly, stigma. Now that Germany has an incredibly problem with landarts, which is basically a doctor at the countryside. It's incredibly boring at the moment you are a doctor. We think the issue there is that it's completely stigmatized, right? Because you have the idea that you're just working with farmers and not getting the medical care. At the moment you're literally sending people there who are hating the job and are going to tell other people they're hating the job. You improve the stigma massively, right? That means you deprive these people of the good taking care of the elderly, and you deprive these people of the teachers. This is crippling these communities. Opening.
Our position is cherry-picking the extreme example of racist 18-year-olds who are set to teach. This engagement is the reasonable scenario of a variety of people with a variety of legitimate opinions being challenged and a variety of positions in society.
Okay, first we know that's like a step to CG, right? Given the fact that they chose to talk about races. Secondly, more importantly, the analysis goes for all, right? Given the fact that they're going to hate everything and every preconception will be enforced. Secondly, what are the consequences for the nationwide economy? Firstly, you're going to split the economy by 1/4, right? Given the fact that the average person works for 40 years, they're going to work a year less. That means you get a 3% fall in your GDP. That's probably very problematic in terms of tax revenue. It's especially problematic for the company that are most reliant on the government. Those are already deprived communities, right? So they get considerably less money flowing into them. They get worse teachers in the long term. Secondly, who's doing these jobs? Now that this is about relatively unskilled labor, given the fact that you can learn it in 1 year, right? We see that generally there are disenfranchised people, economically disenfranchised people who are doing these kind of jobs. Now you get a massive influx, or incredibly cheap, basically free labor of this kind of jobs. Two effects. Firstly, people will get fired. I think that's incredibly hard for those people. It also means that the government needs to take care of it. Secondly, wages will go down, given the fact that there's far more supply. I think that's incredibly problematic because you're making poor people even poorer. This policy cripples everyone. We are incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Drop 4.
Panel, it was very interesting what first up said at the beginning of the debate. They said the taxes are good, laws are good, schools are good because they helped us to have a functioning state. So what we need to do from government side is actually to prove that our policy of this mandatory year will actually help to provide the functioning state. And what we did from a closing government is showing you the mechanisms, how actually we destroy stereotypes, how we decrease xenophobia, and how we increase empathy by actually getting exposed to new ideas and getting to work under new authorities and getting out of your echo chamber. That was the first step, and the second step, that this all leads to new perceptions and less right-wing parties, less populism, and having less hate in our society as a whole. In my summary, I have one point of rebuttal that doesn't fit into those, coming from closing opposition, and this is the one where people lose jobs if we just put on like really cheap workers out there. The answer is pretty simple. I come from Germany, where you had this system for many, many decades, and the thing is that these people are not doing the high-level stuff. They're not surgeons, they're not the directors of schools, they just help to carry around like stuff or paint stuff or do really unimportant work, and therefore actually after it was abolished in Germany around 3-4 years ago, actually hospitals and institutions are crying because of it, because they don't have enough people who do this shitty work, in brackets, for these 500-600 euros in Germany. So we actually did a harm there. So losing jobs is just not a realistic point from our experience. So the interesting thing is how do people change their minds? And actually this is my first point of summary. Because what we have as a debate is this big clash of opposition saying, when I'm exposed to these refugees and when I'm exposed to these other people, I will hate them much more and my racism will be reinforced. And what we're saying you from second government is when you're exposed to them, you're starting to understand them and trying to empathize with them. So what is right, dear panel? And I'm going to just address this point of new information and how it affects my perception. So what if I'm a racist right now? My core beliefs might be, number one, refugees are criminals. Number two, refugees don't want to work. Number three, refugees all want to live on welfare. These are typical thoughts of a racist person. Now, if the person is going to the refugee camp and getting to know those people, actually this person finds suddenly out that refugees do want to work, that refugees do want to earn money, that refugees do want to send that money back to their African states or wherever they might live in order to help their families. And suddenly these refugees are not these money-seeking foreigners or aliens, but people as you and me. And you actually see that your information that you had before, they are all criminals, they all don't want to work, that this information is wrong. Now at the first step, you might think, well, this is something strange. So in the first step, you reject this new information. And we believe that if that person worked there for 1 day or 2 days or 1 week, being exposed to this information, she would still feel reconfirmed, and maybe this is just an exception. Or maybe these refugees, this is the camp that is different from all the other camps. But being mandatory for 1 year, I'm getting exposed to many of those people, pretty many of the times, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. And suddenly I find out the dynamics of them, and even if some refugees really don't want to work, the majority of people will be willing to work and will destroy their perceptions. So what do we hear on the comparative from opposition? We hear from the opposition that the alternative is not to put them out of their echo chamber, but just to leave them where they are. Meaning that if I have sexist fathers or brothers, I will stay in this echo chamber. If I have xenophobic parents, I will never leave this echo chamber and will not be exposed to this new kind of information. So their alternative, what they didn't show us, are the benefits that we are actually showing you by creating this new narrative. Second point we brought you in analysis, how people actually change the perception, is working under a new authority. And this is really important, panel, because first point, I am in a new hierarchy. When I start to work in a hospital or as a teacher, as an assistant teacher, or in a refugee camp, I'm really, really low in the hierarchy, meaning that I get direct orders from my boss, from somebody who's stepping up to them. And we know that people who haven't shaped their identity, who are 18 years old, actually believe in authorities and actually accept authorities over the long on run. So I listen to the boss, and how does it happen? The boss actually holds meetings every morning in a refugee camp. He says what should be done. He says what major problems we have to face. He says what kind of solutions we have to provide. And listening to these new ideas in those meetings, I don't have a choice because we make it mandatory. And we say it's good because this person actually gets to know the true perspective on that. And once again, on the first step, you reject these ideas, maybe in the first week, maybe in the second week. But on the second step, you get used to it. You get used to it that actually refugees have their standard problems, that refugees might work, or that people from poor neighborhoods actually don't like don't like to learn, but you understand them, and therefore you get new information to learn from them.
All of the things about how the immigration rights should be semifinal are the only possibility. All of this is not true. Then why don't we expect people to work into these regions for 5 years like they did during the Soviet Union, for example?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, what is necessary in order to learn? And we think that 1 week is not enough because you've still rejected, you're still in your echo chamber, you're still in the confirmation bias. We think as a state we have to balance that. You can say, why not forever, for a whole life? But at the end of the day, 1 year is enough to understand the living situation. And what follows from these new perceptions, what follows from breaking our stereotypes, is actually the decrease in the right-wing support, the decrease in hate. Like everywhere in Europe, we see the rise of right-wing parties in France, in Germany, in Hungary. And what we will, people who have broken the stereotypes, people who have less hate, won't be as easily catched by these populist phrases, won't just believe Le Pen that all refugees are not working, or all refugees want to suck out our welfare state, and then it won't be bought by these stupid narratives that the right-wing parties present to them. At the end of the day, as we remember what opening opposition said, if we can create a more functioning state by actually exposing people to some coercion, like we do with schools or like we do with laws, we actually are allowed to do this, and it's legitimate to do this. What we have shown you from closing government, that we create mechanisms through new information and through new authorities that actually will enable us to decrease these coercive, these deteriorating right-wing parties, and we will just have the parties that want to increase our well-being. And therefore, we're proud to be focusing.
Thank you very much. Marvelous. Up for.
Government has explained to you really quite well why it would have been a good idea if Ru and I had met people without a uni education before we were 18. What we have explained to you is that it isn't getting better the moment when you force us to associate with those people, and that you force us to associate with these people for an entire year in, as opening government tells us, terrible conditions. We're very proud to oppose. So, what are you going to get in my speech? First of all, I'm going to talk about these communities, then I'm going to talk about these students, or these 18-year-olds, and lastly I'm going to talk about society. So, first of all, these communities, right? What Ru has explained to you is that you're perpetuating ideas about these communities, and that you're perpetuating the idea in these communities that they are second-rate. Why? Because you're sending second-rate people to them. Because you're sending people to them that haven't been properly educated, that don't actually know how to be empathetic to the elderly, that don't actually know how to be proper teachers to primary school kids, etc. One of the smartest people I know, Karen Markins, is currently learning how to be a primary school teacher, right? If she can't do it at 18 right out of the school benches, I don't think, on average, general people can. So we think that we're very, very unlucky should we force these people to do that. We also think that for the richest circuits, etc., you don't need to send these kinds of people there, so they will still get the proper education, they will still get all of the best teachers going there, you're perpetuating that. Also, we think that if you actually want all of that positive emancipation that obviously state opposition also wants, for refugee camps, you should probably send really, really good teachers there so they can actually learn things, actually be able to develop themselves, etc., and not send those people that can't really do anything else. We also think that, for example, being a nurse is quite difficult, right? Okay, so then on the idea of students. And what we've basically told you is that these students are going to get a massive backlash, right? Or not students, but 18-year-olds in general. We think that they're probably not being as empathetic as the government wants you to believe. So the government tells you, well, then you get to know lots of people, and then you get to associate with all of these people, and you'll meet really, really nice people, and that will be grand. True, probably meet some nice people, right? Yeah. But rules explain to you that especially people that already have certain stereotypes in their mind will see these stereotypes as well, right? And will then associate with these stereotypes because they like to enforce their own ideas. That means that you then get that even worse, because you enforce your own stereotypes, you see everyone else as the exception. So we think that for people that are already really, really quite racist, that the closing government wants to talk about, that's definitely not going to get better. But then about the people that are tabula rasa, right, that have no other idea, that have no preconceptions. Well, we don't think they're going to have that much fun either, right? Because the moment when you then talk to these people, the moment when you associate these people and you do meet new influences, you're also automatically going to assume and associate these people with the kind of environment you're forced into being. That means two things. First of all, you're associating them with being forced into something, right? Being forced to do something. I think that's a terrible association. Secondly, opening government tells us that we need to do this because currently no one wants to go to these areas because these areas are very poor, or very unenlightened, are very sad places to be in. Well, then you're probably also having a sad time if you're there, right? That means that the moment when you're then forced into that, you're going to associate these people with that. What opposition does is send these people to work, send these people to uni, send these people to more school, whatever. That means that then they're going to interact with all of these kinds of people, but they A, have chosen to do that, yay that, right, it's probably better, and B, they're going to do that in a much nicer environment than in the environment that they actually want. So we think that is much better. No, thank you. 15 seconds, etc. So, that massive backlash, right? So they're really going to hate all of these people, not getting all of the benefits proposition wants to believe. But what do we get as a massive negative effect? No, thank you. Rules explain to you that other than these entire communities just being much, much worse off because they get less decent education, we think that, yeah, throwing money at a problem might not always be the right solution. It's definitely better than throwing uneducated 18-year-olds at the problem, right? So we think, also, throwing money at a problem not being a solution is kind of against my religion. No. So, more problematic, we think that you're screwing over the entire economy, right? The moment when you actually make sure that all of these 18-year-olds are not going to work, are not going to be properly educated, etc., that means that all of them start work a year later. That means that they're not contributing to that society that way. I think that means that every single year after that is a year with less experience, less decent being able to do that. It means just the entire economy is going to get smaller. What does Rule explain to you? That means that there's less money to throw at problems, there is less money to actually fix all of these things. We think that's very harmful. But more importantly, we also think that you're taking these jobs away from those people that would otherwise have these unskilled labour jobs, right? We think right now, there are people that change mentions. Yeah, they have to have some education, and you can't do that in the 2 months or the 4 weeks or something that they're willing to provide in a second. But when they do, then they actually do that, right? And they have lots of money to do that, and they can actually work and do nice things. You're taking that away because every year there are going to be new 18-year-olds that are taking over those jobs. That is that once again, the rich are taking your jobs, and which is a terrible thing. Second half.
In Germany and Austria, high school students, we force them to visit concentration camps so they can understand the effects of Nazism and far right. Why this is not the same idea that force them so they can understand the ideas, and we can sacrifice a couple of backpacking years they could probably spend in Mallorca.
Okay, so first of all, we're not entirely sure whether you should force people to do anything on the sort. Secondly, we don't think you've proven, as I've just explained, that this is actually going to get better, right? So no, thank you. Last thing on the idea that this worked really well in Germany, right? So not every country is Germany. I know we're all very sad by that fact, but you know, most countries have more unemployment rates, so that means that most countries have more people that would have loved to get those jobs that you're now sending to 18-year-olds that could have done other things, that could have been more useful for society. What have Ru and I explained to you? What have I explained to you? That you're not only screwing over the entire society because you are making that economics, the economics much, much worse. That you're not only especially targeting these communities, so you're making them worse, you're perpetuating the ideas about these communities. We've also told you that there's going to be a massive backlash from 18-year-olds. They're never going to like anyone else again. I think that's very, very sad. We're very proud to be